Hello, everyone, and welcome to February's Business of All Protein seminar. My name is Audrey Gear, and I am a Startup Innovation Specialist here at the Good Food Institute. We have a lot of folks registered today. I'll give everyone just a minute or so to log in. In the meantime, it would be great to see where everyone is calling in from. I am dialing in from San Francisco today. I know we have some other folks who are panelists calling in from New Jersey, Colorado Springs, all over the world, Bend, Oregon. So if you want to share where you're calling in from, would love to see that. And today's webinar is all about developing effective corporate partnerships. So this is a big topic, and we really have an amazing group of panelists today who will share the perspective of larger corporates on how to develop those partnerships. Before we get started, I do just have a few housekeeping items. First of all, for those of you who might be new to the work of the Good Food Institute, we are an international nonprofit organization, and we're developing the roadmap for sustainable, secure, and just protein supply. To do that, we identify the most effective solutions, we mobilize resources and talent, and we empower partners across the food system to make all proteins accessible, affordable, and most importantly, delicious. Second, this seminar will be recorded. We will be posting a copy of the recording to our YouTube channel. We'll also be emailing all of you a copy of the recording. So if you missed part of this or didn't catch something, no worries. We will be recording it and we will be sending that to you so you can revisit this later on. Third here, I do want to flag that we're hosting a virtual networking mixer in about a month on March 30th. So the discussion topic for that mixer will be on plant-based sales and trends in plant-based proteins. At our last mixer, we had over 600 introductions made. So these are a great way to meet folks across the world who are working in alt proteins. And we'll drop a link in the chat here for anyone who would like to RSVP for that networking. And then lastly, we'll be following a bit of a different format today. So we'll first have a brief presentation on the different types of corporate partnerships to really set the stage. We'll then kick off a panel discussion with our panelists, and that will be followed by about 30 minutes of audience Q&A. If you can, please remember to ask your questions in the Q&A box rather than the chat. This just helps us keep track of them more easily. And of course, you're welcome to ask questions throughout the seminar, but we will likely only get to answer them towards the end. And so with that, it is my pleasure to introduce our very first expert today, who will be giving about a 10-minute presentation on partnerships. So Scott May is a cross-functional leader of innovation and strategy in the food and beverage industry. He has 35 years of experience, and Scott is the VP of Innovation and the founder of Mista, a new venture funded by Givaudan, the world's largest flavor company. Mista's mission is to help startups and corporate partners optimize ideas, products, people, and investments by connecting them to a world-class food and beverage development facility, capabilities, and an ecosystem located in the heart of San Francisco. I've been to the Mista headquarters. It's really awesome. And Scott has worked with countless startups and larger corporations. So welcome, Scott. I will hand it over to you for your presentation.
Super. Thanks, Audrey. Appreciate it. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody. Thanks for joining us. I am going to just spend a few minutes framing a bit around partnerships before we go into the panel. So the first thing I want to talk about is options to partnering and why people would want to partner versus other ways of thinking about bringing new technologies to market. And of course, this is from a perspective of a corporate. So why would a corporate engage with early stage companies? Of course, they could build it themselves. But of course, the con to that is many times it's long time to market, high development costs, and there's market shift risks. Of course, another option is to buy the technology or the ingredients. And there's pros and cons to that. And then lastly, the partnership side, which is fastest to market. You get to try before you buy and conserve resources on the pro side. And on the con side, you have less control. Maybe you have to share margins and profit. And of course, there's integration challenges when you're trying to integrate either technologies or ingredients into organizations. But another thing that's not listed here, so those are really the tangible opportunities. The more less tangible is the fact that when you partner, you're actually experiencing new things, and those experiences can create new opportunities and new learnings. So that's really what we're going to talk about today is all around partnerships, why partner, and how best to partner. So first of all, what is a partnership? Well, there's different levels as we see it. The first is around a customer supplier. So if you have a new ingredient or technology, and perhaps you want to partner with a CPG company for them to utilize your ingredients into their solutions, that's what I would call the lowest level, meaning level of complexity and risk. The next is around business partnership. So perhaps this is an area where you want to partner with a larger organization to leverage their sales organization, for example, or maybe their market position, or maybe even their manufacturing scale. The next is around joint development. So this would be working in collaboration to create a new product or technology. Usually involves a joint development agreement. And as it shows on the right, it increases the complexity and risk. And at the bottom is a joint venture. So this is 2 or more companies developing a single enterprise or a project for profit. Everyone shares in the risk associated with that. And this usually involves a joint venture agreement. So why would one consider partnerships? And this is both on both sides of the fence. So those who are on maybe the big organizations and on the other side are early stage companies. So the first is feedback on new ingredients, technologies, and business models. So it's a really great way to learn about some of these new things that are happening and coming to fruition. Another is around time to market, perhaps market reach. Capacity to scale is a huge one. As we all know, there's humongous challenges when you bring new ingredients and new technologies to market. Figuring out where and how to scale is a real challenge, and partnerships is a good way to tackle that. Integration capacity is another one. So understanding how you're going to integrate these new ingredients and technologies together is key, and a partnership can really help that. Maybe technology know-how or capacity. So in other words, tapping into the technical resources of your partners. Could be even access to feedstock or raw materials or side streams that somebody may have that you need as an input material for your own technology. Could be that they are potential investors. So it's a good way to partner. It's kind of test drive, and it's a good way to explore that. It's a proof to investors on relevance. So if you're partnering, for example, you're a small early stage company and you're partnering with a large organization, it proves that there is pull there from the marketplace. And as I mentioned in my previous slide, new experiences and learnings. And this is one of the key areas for partnership because it really helps understand the market dynamics. It helps understand the needs of the customers. And so this is a really important space on why considering partnerships. So next is what to consider in partnerships. The first is around reciprocity. So to have a partnership, you have to find these win-win opportunities. And sometimes that's not so straightforward. So it takes time and effort to actually figure those out potentially with the partner. Strategic fit. Does your solution or technology address a strategic need of the partner you're working with? And it's important to understand that up front, because once you understand how it fits in their strategic need, it's much easier to make things move forward. Mindset fit is an important one. Do you care about the same things? Because ultimately, if you go down the path and perhaps you don't care about the same things, there could be a challenge, especially when you're talking about JDAs and joint ventures. Track record. Are there other successes or failures that they have? Why? Maybe you can learn from that. Then, of course, there's the legal needs. It's my favorite part. Not really, but it is an important aspect. to understand really, what's required here. Non-disclosure agreements, material transfer agreements, business agreements, all of those are extremely important. And we all know that the timing required for these agreements, can be a big challenge. So be prepared for that. IP is a big one, and I'm sure we're going to cover this during the panel. Priorities. So big company versus small company, they can be very different. As a large organization, you have thousands of priorities. As a small company, you may have one priority. So making sure you understand where those realities lie are extremely important. Support. Leveraging ecosystems where you can to help navigate. So for example, Mista is an ecosystem, and this is exactly what we do with our members, is helping them partner effectively between and amongst the ecosystem. And lastly here is exclusivity. So many times when you go into a partnership, there's a desire to have exclusivity, maybe for a technology or an ingredient. And there's all kinds of risks and rewards related to that. So it's important to suss those out and understand what those are. So finally, other considerations, and I'll leave this for panel discussions, and there's likely a lot more, but how do you find the right partners? How do you identify them? How do you know if they're good, if they're going to be good partners or not? Champions in the corporate partner. So this is a key one. How do you identify the right person in these large organizations to work with? And finally, multi-way partnerships. How do you identify how that can work, how the benefits, and an example here would be if you're a new ingredient that you're trying to bring to market, and perhaps you're engaging with a CPG company to work with them on exploring the fit for this ingredient into their solution. That's one partnership. But another part of that partnership is ultimately you may have to engage in a partnership with a large ingredient supplier, for example, because if you need to scale this ingredient quickly, you're going to end up quickly in a three-way partnership. So maybe we can talk a little bit about that during the panel. So with that, I'll pause here. I'll stop sharing and we can dive into, I think, what's going to be a pretty amazing panel.
Thank you so much, Scott. That was a great intro and an overview to partnerships. And now we can dig into the meat of our conversation with the other panelists. So I'll go ahead and introduce the other folks that we'll have on the call today. First, we have Wendy Van Buren, who is the commercial leader for global alternative protein growth at Archer Daniels Midland, ADM. She brings over 30 years of broad experience in the food industry, in technical and commercial roles, and in every part of the value chain. ADM continues to invest and provide the edge customers need to succeed in this fast-paced alternative protein world. Here, Wendy leads the alternative protein growth and diversification of proteins with focus on new proteins for alternative meats, which means not only new protein sources, but new ways to enhance nutrition, texture, flavor, and appearance, and inspire new formats. Welcome, Wendy. Next up, we have Greg Alloy, who is the Vice President in the Global Customer Co-Creation and Applications at Ingredion. Greg has been with Ingredion for 35 years and is responsible for Ingredion's later stage development and food applications of their customer solutions. He also leads Ingredion's key customer enabler capabilities, culinology, and sensory. Greg and his teams also work closely with regional technical and go-to-market teams to help customers launch new products and refresh existing brands. Welcome, Greg. Next up, we have Achyut Paturi, who is the Chief Financial Officer for the Kraft Heinz Knot Company. He has been involved with Kraft Heinz Knot Company since prior to its inception in 2022 as a joint venture between Kraft Heinz and the Knot Company. Prior to joining the joint venture, Achyut was at Kraft Heinz for 6 years, where he held various positions in finance across the away-from-home, corporate, and retail businesses. Most recently, he was the head of finance for Easy Meals Made Better, a portfolio of iconic brands, including Kraft Mac and Cheese, Ore-Ida, Classico, Velveeta, Bagel Bites, Delamex, Stovetop, and Devour. Quite a few familiar names there. And today, his work is primarily focused on delivering the financial execution for the JV to deliver on its ambition of democratizing plant-based foods for all. Welcome, Achyut. And then last but not least, we have Ted Berber, who leads open innovation for Danone, using his experience to partner with startups and mid-scale companies for our regenerative food future. He lived his innovation experience at IDEO, Pearl Izumi, and W.L. Gore, where his responsibilities have included product development, marketing, and manufacturing in North America, Europe, and Asia. As a business leader, engineer, and consumer-centered design thinker, he has launched profitable, disruptive products and services for the world's best companies. Welcome, Ted.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so as you can see, we have an absolutely all-star group of panelists here. We'll spend the next 45 minutes or so engaging in a panel discussion, and then we'll open up the last 30 minutes or so today for audience Q&A. So all the folks tuning in, keep your questions ready, and you can share those anytime through the Q&A box. Just a reminder, please send us your questions through the Q&A box rather than the chat so we can keep track of them. But to begin with, we have a range of companies here with various priorities and goals. So to start, I'd love to hear from each of you about your specific company, your role, and how you view partnerships factoring into each of your company's business. Wendy, could I start with you, and then maybe we'll kick it over to Ted, Greg, Chu, and then Scott.
Yes, absolutely. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here talking about this very important topic, something that I've been working on with ADM and other companies for a good part of my career. My role really as commercial leader in this alternative protein space is accelerating growth in our strategic segments. So what Scott talked about, finding that fit where we have our strategic priorities and where we can have that win-win is the primary, I'd say, key to success. I'm also looking at acquisition targets and building, of course, our own capabilities. So it's that buy, build, partner kind of strategy also. Partnerships are a key part of the strategic focus. And because we are in such a disruptive, extremely disruptive time in our industry, I know and we know specifically that we need to advance our collective mission in the most impactful way, and that we do this together. So I work with many companies in the ecosystem along the whole value chain, everywhere from very early stage to more developed mid-sized companies. And again, I'm looking for that win-win, specific partnership that we can help each other.
Thanks, Wendy. And Ted, could you share a bit more about how Danone thinks about partnerships?
Yeah, I like the way Wendy put it, but we're really looking to solve some specific needs. So we've got consumer goals that we're looking to deliver nutrition, health through food. We're looking to meet our sustainability goals. We're looking to meet our business goals. And so when we can find a partnership, a technology that unlocks one or more of those, it really kind of helps us close the gaps that we see in our business. If you're a startup and you're approaching a CPG and you recognize that there's an opportunity in their portfolio for your product to make it better, to make it different, really come into that meeting with an idea of how you can change their business. And so it's really what I'm looking for.
Thank you. Chu, we're up next. What's Kraft Heinz approach when it comes to partnerships?
Amazing. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Very excited to be here. I have a unique perspective. I'm actually within the Kraft Heinz Not Company now, so coming over from Kraft Heinz, which is, as Scott was mentioning earlier, one of the different ways here. We're actually a joint venture between the Kraft Heinz Company and the Not Company. Many people are familiar with Kraft Heinz Company being one of the largest food and beverage companies in North America. Not Company is a food tech company that was founded about 5 years ago and actually brings forward patented AI technology. And what we do within the joint venture is we're really looking for an opportunity to create value both for consumers as well as for our shareholders. So within this joint venture, we really combine the patented AI technology that NotCo brings with Kraft Heinz's brand portfolio and scale with an ultimate vision of accelerating and democratizing plant-based foods. So touches a lot of, as the remaining panelists are talking about, how do you create value? How do you collaborate? How do you bring different companies together? That's exactly what this joint venture is anchored around doing.
Thank you. Excited to learn more about it. And Greg, how does Ingredion think about
Yes,
partnerships?
thank you, Audrey. Well, again, good morning and good afternoon, good evening to everybody. So nice to see so many participants from all over the world. At Ingredion, we're a large ingredient company, almost $8 billion in sales. So we have a lot of activities, but I can say we are focused, as all companies need to be, on a few things. One of them is innovation and innovating in a sustainable way. A part of that is our plant-based solutions and alternative product solutions, where we've invested heavily in, and also to make sure we provide the best customer experience to our customers, some of them here today, whether they be small or multinational, because we don't win. We like to say we don't win unless our customers win. As a part of that, as an example, in partnering, we partner in a number of ways. We realized that smaller, more startup companies require different attention. And about 5 years ago, we actually created an emerging business team to handle things like sampling, small orders, but also the specific needs of smaller and startup companies. We have a lot of technical centers called Idea Labs around the world. And we have our own specific program and partnership with smaller companies called Catalyst, as well as being members and partners ecosystems, such a proud member of Mista. So I can say with my 35 years of experience, we're probably as big a company as we've ever been, but we're partnering more and more because we have to, right? For the solutions that we need and the speed that we need to deliver them to the market cost effectively.
Thanks, Greg. And Scott, would love to hear more about Mista, your role at Mista. I think you have such a unique perspective to share on this panel, since you understand this from the startup and the corporate side.
Yeah, thanks, Audrey. So Mista was formed with the purpose to help transform the global food system to meet the needs of the future. And we know that no single company is going to be able to do this on its own. And so that was really the point of creating Mista, is a unique global innovation platform that is really all about partnerships. It's about creating partnerships, big to big, big to small, small to small, and everything in between. And it's really about looking at the whole value web. I like to call it value web instead of value chain because it is not linear. And so within this value web, identifying opportunities to partner, either partner to partner or multiple partnerships, we believe is the key to really moving this food system to the future. And it's a whole systems approach, where we're looking at the impact of each ingredient, each technology on the system as a whole. And so again, partnerships is really the basic foundation for this across the board. So we're excited to have several of our corporate members here with us and today, and yeah, hopefully we can dig in a bit more.
Thank you. Indeed. So I work with startups at the Good Food Institute, and a very common question that I get from early stage companies in particular are how to even approach a large company about a partnership. And Scott, you mentioned this in your presentation. These are huge companies, thousands of employees sometimes. How do you talk to these companies? Who's the right department? Who's the right person? How do you find those internal champions as a smaller company when you're approaching a larger one? I'm assuming it's different company by company, but would love to hear from all of our panelists how they would suggest approaching their business. Ted, can I start with you this time?
Yeah, Audrey, thank you. I actually, for me, approach me any way you can. Organizations like Danone are, we're pretty far flung globally. One of the things that we're pretty good at is connecting internally. We're also very open to getting approached through organizations like Mista. Scott and his team do a great job of connecting startups to CPGs like Danone. We're one of the reasons we belong to Mista is to kind of extend our reach a little further beyond just the events that we can get to. The other thing is through events like whether it's an alternative protein event, we've got the Future Food Tech coming up in a couple of weeks. We just had the fermentation enabled protein conference a couple of weeks ago. Throughout the year, those are all places where start up a conversation, make a connection one way or another. LinkedIn is obviously another source of connection for us.
Thanks, Ted. And would you say that the innovation team is the right team to reach out at Danone? Is there a specific team focused entirely on partnerships, or are there other departments that would be helpful?
It really depends on the technology. If it's something that can be integrated short term, then yeah, the local R&I teams certainly make sense. If it's something that needs some extensive development or integration, then typically I support several of our advanced development teams in France and in the Netherlands for specialty nutrition, and so trying to funnel those products into connections with the right development team is my job. Break down those silos and really kind of make sure that the technology is given a very fair evaluation and qualification, and then that it doesn't get dropped or just forgotten, because everybody's very busy.
Absolutely. And Greg, what's the best way to approach Ingredion as a smaller company looking for a partnership?
I would echo some of the things and build upon some of the things Ted said. I think the main difference, with an established company, they may already have a relationship with a salesperson or some network within, say, Ingredion or other ingredient suppliers. So they pick up the phone or call, or they have their channels established. Where the new company or the startup companies, they may not have that initial channels. I think it's good to start, all else being equal, through the technical functions, because then we can spread it out. Even if it's a venturing or some financial partnership you're looking for, we have that through our open innovation person that works very, very closely. As part of some of the things we've done, in that emerging business, is we've created in many of the regions, and particularly North America, a digital inside sales. And there were very technical people who can take those calls or get channeled from LinkedIn or other venues into and start that process. And as I said, for example, our Catalyst program was set up not exclusively, but very heavily favoring startup companies. So we put some programs that are almost exclusive to startup companies. And then additionally, finally, perhaps most importantly, through our relationship with Mista, we get a lot of connectivity points there. So that's another great channel.
Thanks, Greg. And Wendy, what would you say for ADM? What are the best channels to go through?
I think the network opportunities that the others mentioned, of course, are the same also for ADM. And my role is relatively new, just for the purpose of partnering. And so we have now more people that are focused on these type of partnerships, because they do take some time to develop these and also be able to find the right people that we can connect with. We also have a ventures team. So a lot of our connections sometimes come through our ventures. And I'd like to say that ventures is solely focused on the venture capital side of the business, but they find out things about the company and they make connections. And sometimes we find an opportunity that our partnership could really accelerate the opportunity for the startup, for instance, or we find some win-win through that channel as well. So I'm sitting in Amsterdam, and ADM is a global company. And of course, I have some colleagues that are in every part of the globe also, and we are also well networked as well as we can be for a global company. So that's I think it's definitely a focus for ADM, that we are trying to find these intersections and find the synergies so that we can accelerate in a good way.
Thanks, Wendy. And Achu, what would you say for Kraft Heinz? How did the partnership with the Knot company begin?
Absolutely. So I'd say a couple things. One, first, I think I would agree with everything the remaining panelists, first off, have said. There's definitely a number of avenues, whether it's on the ground floor at the R&D level, depending on if it's an ingredient or technology solution, versus, Kraft Heinz also has ventures arms, M&A arms, corporate development arms, et cetera. So there's different levels and layers depending on the opportunity that we're talking about. The one thing that I would add, it's really about when we think about the way to approach a company, especially one of the larger players, the best way is about thinking through how do we create value together. So it's a point that I know Scott emphasized in that earlier up front. We've heard it from a number of panelists here as well. But when you think about how do you approach a large company, it's really about what's the best way where we can find a complementary fit. Is there something that's missing? Is there something that's additive? And that's a lens that really helps progress the conversation versus just an introduction to the idea.
Thanks for that. And I'm seeing Timothy in the audience just chimed in that the difficulty is often not knowing what those complementary services are. Is that something that you're expecting a startup to really understand about your company, or is that something that you have the lens to look at when evaluating a startup that's approaching you for a partnership?
I think it's certainly a bit of both, right? When you're coming from the Kraft Heinz side or company side of it, you know your strengths and capabilities a lot better than what you know as the startup's strengths and capabilities. But in that conversation, as you understand, through the initial dialogue, I think building that foundation or that framework for what is the need, what is, someone like a Kraft Heinz or a large CPG trying to solve in this conversation versus what you're bringing to the table, and finding where those two kind of intersect and really drive value. And that driving value should come from both, ideally the shareholders, so between yourselves and the other company, as well as whoever the end recipient is, right? So can be a consumer, it can be, you and I go to the grocery store, it could be a manufacturer, but whoever it is in between that value chain or value web, who's going to receive the benefit from it.
Got it. Thanks. And Scott, do you have to add into that? I saw some nods.
Yeah. Just to add a few things there. It's for sure understanding what the needs are of a large corporate can be challenging, but two things there. One is, typically you're going to identify maybe where your ingredient or technology could potentially fit, and you can have a list of large companies. And I would say the best way is to go look at their annual reports, because usually annual reports will identify the strategic areas that they're focused in. What are they trying to do? Where are they trying to innovate? So that's one area. The next my recommendation is it's all about networking. So networking could be, as Wendy pointed out, if you're invested in by a VC, typically they have great connections, and that's one place to start. Connecting with ecosystems like EIT Foods or Mista or any of the others that exist is a really great way as well. And as Ted mentioned, going to these conferences and listening, because many times they're on a panel and people are talking about what they're working on, what they need, and so that's a great way as well. So is it easy? No. Is it doable? Yes. With some time and effort, you can find some of those things. But those are my suggestions.
Thanks, Scott. I'm sure folks in the audience appreciate those very specific suggestions, especially in regards to things like the annual report. Shifting gears a little bit, I also hear a lot of confusion from startups about sending samples to larger companies. Particularly from startups that might be creating some novel ingredients that they want to sell B2B. What would you say? I guess there's a few questions within this, like what size, like very specific, like what size of sample is necessary for a larger company to utilize and explore its functionality? Is it possible to send too little, too much? What do you need to know about a product before sharing it with a larger company? And then I guess also within this question is, At what size should you be as a startup to really approach a larger corporate? Is there such a thing as too early or too late for those partnerships? Ted, I know you had some thoughts on this in one of our pre-calls, so I'll let you kick it off again.
Yeah, and Scott kind of touched on the material transfer agreement, or an MTA. Oftentimes it takes a while to get this arranged, because we want to make sure that the startup's intellectual property is protected, but at the same time, as a science and technology group, we need the freedom to kind of analyze what it is and what capabilities it brings to our formulations, so that we can better understand how to apply it. I would say that in my experience, the most successful approach has been when startups maybe have a first product that just allows the developers and kind of the leaders of the technical teams to experience it and get some understanding of, like, what does it bring, or what capabilities does it unlock from an experience point of view. And then we can start to think about, how does it fit into the projects that we're working on and our priorities. We're a leader in plant-based dairy. So, is it going to unlock some nutrition capability? Is it going to unlock some mouthfeel, melt, stretch experience on a plant-based cheese? Is it going to make a yogurt that has Greek-like texture, but really, delivers higher nutrition than what we can do with pea protein, say? So, just come in with some ideas. The other part of it is that, when we talk about IP, we want as much of the ingredient specific IP to belong to the ingredient company or the technology company. And we want as much freedom to operate as we can get around the formulation for the product, that we can then kind of, if we can develop something that's really unique, that we can own.
Thank you. And Scott, could you share a little bit about material transfer agreements and best practices that you've seen with those?
Yeah, so I would say, as Ted mentioned, it can be a lengthy process, because each corporate has their own way of looking at the material transfer agreements, and there are risks associated with this. So if there's a chance that for example, that by signing this MTA and bringing this ingredient in, it actually prevents the large company from a freedom to operate, that's a huge risk. And so it takes time to understand that. It takes time to understand what are the implications of. It's not just like, oh yeah, hey, I'm going to sign here, like signing for a FedEx package. It is truly, there's implications for both sides for signing this. So it requires a lot of effort to look into that. So there is no standard answer. There is no one way fits all, but just knowing that it's not as simple as it may sound is a good way to approach it. I would definitely, usually by the time you're signing an MTA, you've created a relationship with the company. You probably have a champion like a Ted or a Greg or a Wendy or an Achit, and I would rely on them to help navigate this. And you can, that's what they should be there for, is to help navigate this. And again, they're looking for win-win situations. Nowadays, if a large corporation is around today, they're usually not just there to extract things and do damage. They're really looking for win-win situations. And so, I think that's my best advice. And as far as the size, again, working with your champion it will be key in understanding what that is, because it depends completely on what the product is. There's some tests that you can do with micrograms. There's other tests you can't do with, you need grams to kilos. So it all depends really on what it is you're working on, the type of technology it is. And so again, I would rely on your champion that you've identified within that organization.
Thanks, Scott. And Wendy, I saw you nodding a bit during Scott's answer. Do you have anything to add on to that?
Maybe just to reiterate, I think the MTA, again, is something that will be very specific to the situation. And maybe just to add on to the size of the sample to be very practical, especially for protein. We're talking about protein now, and there are all different types of technologies that are, that we can work with in this area. Just a simple characterization, we're talking about 1 kilo max. And again, we could do something with them, micrograms as well. But I think 1 kilo is kind of what we're aiming for, just to start it off. And then again, it depends on what we're talking about. What form is it in? Is it dry? Is it liquid? Are we going to extrude it? What exactly is the opportunity here? Are we going to be co-processing it? And that technology is going to also really dictate exactly what the sample size will be. But I couldn't agree more. Just finding that champion. We're here to help navigate the organization.
If I could add one more thing on the MTAs and the CDAs or whatever agreement, I would work within, particularly with the startup companies, but all companies. And again, this could go either way, ingredient company to a consumer products company or vice versa, for a focused but a well-managed scope. You don't want to get too much scope, or in sometimes if you're, your third party or your legal expertise, they'll err on the side of broad scope. And that's not necessarily good for a number of reasons. They'll include language like including trade secrets, which sets up a company like to make sure that we put barriers there, right? Because the trade secret you have to take seriously. And usually in an initial thing, we don't want your trade secrets. We have no interest in, and by definition, they're a trade secret. You shouldn't be sharing it. So the language of the legal agreement can sometimes bog it down, or the scope. Hey, if this works, all crackers, right? Or something like that. Well, in some cases, large companies, we're channeling through multiple channels, including distributors. We don't even know where all of our products, if they're established, are selling. So it makes it very difficult. But if you piece together an agreement that's very specific to what you want to accomplish, it goes a lot faster on both parties. And it can be adhered to much more rigorously because when we sign an agreement, we take it in, we want to make sure that we can protect our client, including the startup company. And if we don't know where anything's going, or we can't, protect against a trade secret, we'd rather not have that language in there, and it's not needed. And that can really, if you can get that focus, it can expedite things significantly.
Absolutely. And just to maybe build off of that, with trade secrets, material transfer agreement, how do you suggest that a startup protects their IP? Is it really through evaluating those legal agreements? Are there other things that startups should be thinking about when approaching a larger company to protect their IP? This is, of course, a huge area of concern for many of these smaller companies. I'll let anyone chime in if you have some thoughts there.
I'll just, I'd say one of the things you can first do is, protect your intellectual property before you approach somebody. Sometimes not always easy as accomplished as you want it to be. And then the second step, and I'll let my colleagues build upon this, is really look at your space, right? So if you're approaching, say, an ingredient supplier with a finished consumer products, kind of the reverse of what Ted said. Protect the finished product, right? Because we're not going to get in the finished product. Let the ingredient supplier protect or provide you with a patented or a unique ingredient that the very purpose is to enable you to be successful in the marketplace.
Maybe just to add on to that, I think building on the synergies, because we find like if, ADM is also in the ingredient space, and if we're, really helping that from a scaling perspective, there are some things that we can do with feedstocks to help, improve the efficiency or the affordability of the product, but it's not something that we would necessarily go to market with. So I think it's also where we see where we carve out the specific expertise and what you need to really enable your technology. Is finding that let's say balance in the synergy, and where again we find that win-win. We're not necessarily in each other's space. Even we work with equipment manufacturers. We work again in this amazing ecosystem that we have to really enable this new technology to be successful.
And
Yeah,
I'll just one more, sorry, Ted, one more thing to add there is as painful as it may be to go out and find an attorney, that's, the best advice is to, as an early stage company, is to identify a partner that can work with you and support your legal needs. And I mean, that's why you do fundraising, because you need money to go do that. But it's important to do. And typically, if you find the right one, they can really help navigate you through this. And especially if you find ones that are used to working in the food space, because the food space is very, very different than other areas. And there's experts all over the place. And again, relying on other ecosystems to help you. If you don't know who to go to, reach out. I'm sure GFI has a list of attorneys, and there's like Naturally Network, Naturally Bay Area. All these entities have people that they recommend that are likely in the food space to help you.
Yeah, just a quick plug. GFI does have an industry consultants list on our website. We also have a few seminars about developing an IP strategy on our YouTube channel for anyone who wants to dig into that a little bit more. Ted, did you have anything to add on this?
No, I think everybody kind of hit the high points. Really, if you're a startup and you've got something unique, protect what makes it unique. And that's where your value is going to come in. The value not only of the ingredient or the product, but the value of the intellectual property that you create is what your investors are buying into. That's what they're trying to promote to really grow that and to bring it more value. But at the same time, we want to solve industry problems. We want to deliver consumer benefit. And we're really looking for those unique products that are going to close the gaps for us.
Absolutely. And I'd love to talk a little bit about timelines and what startups should be expecting in terms of how long will it take to actually establish a partnership? Is this a 2-month process? Is this a 2-year process? And Achut, maybe we can talk about the partnership with Kraft Heinz and NotCo and the Not Company. How did this collaboration come to be? How long did it take? What should startups be expecting?
Absolutely. What I would say on timeframes, broadly speaking, is however long you think it's going to take, it would probably take longer than that timeframe. We always have, the idea and the complementary nature, everything that we're talking about gets everyone very excited. You want to proceed with as much speed as possible. You get very ambitious about when you're going to start and how you're going to execute on the opportunity. What I found both with the current joint venture that I'm part of, as well as partnerships in the past, is getting that first idea across the stage and getting that build-in and buy-in. What you're kind of hearing from everyone on the panel is there's a lot of partnerships and companies looking to partner, right? We're looking for speed and we're looking for capabilities that will allow, whether it's speed capabilities or you name the qualitative that's going to allow it, but to take the company to the next step. But to get from that idea to what makes the best sense from a practical execution perspective is going to take a lot of legal work, a lot of business work, a lot of strategy work. And those are ones that can't be understated. The central underpinning behind at least what makes a partnership successful and what drives most of this timeline is to make sure that the partners are united in their vision that they're looking for. So what does that vision look like for the near term, medium term, long term? And then how are you going to action on those? So for us specifically within the joint venture, it took us several months before we were, there was months of work that happened before we announced, I believe it was February 22nd of last year that we were forming this partnership. Early conversations had started much longer, much prior to that. Normally when you see these partnerships form, you just come in on the tail end and that's what's disclosed to everyone.
Thank you. Wendy, what would you say a typical timeline is for developing a partnership with a company like ADM?
Unfortunately, there's no such thing as typical when it comes to these. And I have to say, it just depends, which is a terrible answer. But one of the things I think is important to help the speed of a partnership is to make sure that there's the right scope. And the more detailed the mission is that we're working on together, the easier it is to really have, let's say, a well-defined mission, I think is number one. Two is that it is prioritized in both companies, because if it is something that is not necessarily, again, going back to that strategic fit, then it's going to fall off on somebody's radar and it won't be prioritized. The other thing is, I think is also helping with the speed would be, do you already have a proof of concept? Because that really helps also for us to be able to visualize and see working together, bringing it to life and understanding what the needs are a little bit more specifically. So I think, just as an example, and again, completely different type of partnership that we have with an equipment manufacturer that we have worked over a year on this, let's say, JV that we're going to be forming. And I think to the point, it takes quite a long time, even when it is, really clearly defined, just to get through all of the different steps that it takes to set up another entity, for instance. So if you're going down a JV path versus, let's say, a go-to-market, or let's just say we're talking about a completely different enabling type of partnership where, we can help with the scaling process, for instance, or help with a flavor issue or whatever it might be. So it really does depend on the nature of the partnership, how long it might take.
Absolutely. Ted and Greg, do you have any thoughts on timelines? Was there anything typical in your companies? Sounds like probably not, but what would you suggest to a startup?
I would agree. Unfortunately, it depends, but it's also dependent on the scope. So, for example, talking about the co-creation program that we started, it's purposely designed to bring a startup in and get the understanding, what we call a statement of work, and really an agreement up front, and in a couple months, get something to fruition, and again, go from there. And it's been successful in some cases and with repeat business. Now, if you're starting something up like a joint venture that, I do talk about, you're not going to do that in 2 months. That could take, several quarters, if not a couple of years. And those in particular, I agree with them 100%. There's always an extra quarter, and there's always an extra month of something, right, that you didn't, despite your best effort and your best planning, didn't account for. But it also, you brought up a very good point about the vision. If you don't have the vision right, and what the guiding principles are in the beginning, that timeline just can amble on. And so if you have that, at least you can address those problems. Say, okay, it is what it is. We've got to work at this another 30 days, but we understand why. And when we get there, we'll be done.
Yeah, and to go back, there is no one size fits all. We do everything from dairy to medical nutrition, infant formula. Some of the medical nutrition and infant formula requires clinical studies that are going to take a couple of years to get through. Some of the plant-based dairy stuff, it might be a drop-in or a replacement for an existing ingredient. And so it becomes a renovation almost. We can move really quickly on some things. Just to give you a sense, we got a green light to do an LOI with a startup the Q4 of last year, and I'm still waiting for our legal department to come back. Here it is. It's end of February. So it's like nothing moves quickly. Sometimes things move instantaneously. We hope for the instantaneous. Very rarely happens. Everybody's got to really take their time and think about what we're doing. We've got to have the right justifications for how it fits into our business. And then all of a sudden things happen.
Great. And we have about 5 more minutes of this panel discussion, and then we'll shift over to some of the audience Q&A that's been coming in. So I'd love to talk about maybe best practices, common mistakes that you see startups making. Scott, wondering if you could kick us off with this question. Could you maybe share 2 or 3 best practices that startups can use, and one mistake that you see startups making when developing partnerships, when approaching larger companies?
Yeah, I mean, that one's hard because it is so different depending on the circumstance. But I would say that the food system over the past 5 years has evolved pretty significantly, and the opportunities that exist in just the stuff that we're talking about, we probably couldn't have talked about this 5 or 7 or 8 years ago, because the large companies didn't have people who were set up in this way. Early stage companies were kind of new to this whole thing. So, we're evolving, but we're also maturing to a point where it is getting more effective in how we do things. There's more entities like Mista, like GFI, like others who were around to help support this that didn't exist several years ago. So I know that wasn't your question, but I see it's moving in a way that makes life easier for everybody. And so we see more success now than we did just a few years ago. And not to continue to try to plug Mista, but again, I think the success is having connections into some type of ecosystem is so important, just because of the nature of how complex this food system is, and understanding sort of the system around you in a holistic way. Even though you play one part of it, understanding the whole is critical. Because then it will just help really understand your place in this world. And then I would say, some things around watch outs and some mistakes are probably more to do with a sense of I don't know, of ego, where the founders have a bit of an ego, and they don't want, they just think that they can do it themselves, and so I've seen some challenges come to fruition in that way. So yeah, those are my suggestions.
Thanks, Scott. And totally agree with you on the ecosystem. Of course, Mista is amazing. And we also have the GF Ideas community. For anyone on the call who hasn't yet joined, that's a global community of people in the alt protein space. We have a Slack channel, a newsletter. We host virtual networking mixers, some in-person mixers. So if you haven't joined yet, please join that community. It's a really great group of folks. But opening it up to the other panelists, any thoughts on best practices, maybe mistakes that you see startups making when they approach you? We can do a little bit a rapid fire round robin. Wendy, I'll start with you.
I don't necessarily think there's a common mistake, but I do think it's important to keep the end in mind. Keep the consumer in mind when you're developing something along this, let's say, ecosystem. If you keep the consumer in the lens, then you can make sure that the partners along the way are going to also find it of value.
I would add to that two things. One is oftentimes Scott talked about ego. Maybe I would put it, sometimes the hurdle can be greed. We talked about value and trying to get a win-win situation. Oftentimes it's a win-win-win, because we've got maybe a technology company, an ingredient company, and a CPG, and everybody's got to make a margin. We can't set it up so that all of that is in one basket and not in another. We need to make sure that everybody has longevity and can really be in this for the long run. The other mistake I see often is having one product and not having a pipeline of what's going to come after that. Obviously, you need to focus in one thing to get started, but you need to clearly have a plan for what's the second, third, fourth product that's going to be in your pipeline, and how are you going to develop that, because that is going to create your business success and your business longevity.
Yeah, I think I would phrase it, maybe not pitfalls, but just the alignment up front and the perspective differences. And it's a two-way street. So kind of turning the question around, I'll say, looking at my team members, they're used to maybe working with an established food company. Scallops, these companies know how to make what they know how to make. And sometimes there's a disconnect there of understanding that if we're successful, where do we go from here? Different. Likewise, we're used to maybe dealing with, fundamentally science and technology people that are working in R&D, facilities, versus an entrepreneur who's looking at multiple facets of how they want to drive their business forward. And sometimes, there can be a disconnect up front. And I think, the startups can help us call that out and say, hey, we need this plus this, or at least we think we do. And I think we can open up each other's minds a little bit and get aligned up front a little quicker. And some of those, you could call them pitfalls, but they're really just knowing each other's, approaches a little bit better up front.
I would just re-echo and emphasize, I think a couple of points that the remaining panelists have also said, but Wendy, when you said consumer first, that's a great lens. That's one that we come back to anchor to, whether we're talking about the vision or the value, right? Those are very important components of it. But the consumer first mentality and attraction is something that everyone can clearly see and kind of come back to circling to. Greg, I think one of the things that you're calling out, I just gave it one word and I said, it's cross collaboration, because when you think about this, any of these partnership examples, or even in the joint venture, neither one party has the answer to solving everything or knows the answer to solving everything. So coming into it with the vision and the value, the consumer first mindset, and then being able to provide and receive as well the feedback to cross collaborate across the other partner, whether it's the startup side or the larger corporate side, I think is essential for closing on that partnership.
Thank you. And we'll spend the next 28 minutes going through some of the audience questions. So quick plug for those of you still here. If you have a question for our panelists, please submit it via the Q&A box, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. I did just see one pop up that was related to your point, Ted, around products. How many would you say are good to have in the pipeline? How extensive does your product portfolio need to be compelling?
I think we are going to go back to the it depends answer. It depends on what the technology is. If it's easy to develop variations, whether it's new flavors, okay, those are maybe a little easier than trying to develop completely different proteins. If you say you've got a dairy protein and you're looking to do an egg protein, those are so different that the time might be too is good to have in your pipeline. You're not going to have the 12, obviously. So it really depends on what the product is, what the technology is, what the development timeline is, like how fast can you grow your development team? What kind of resources do you have for your lab space, your pilot space? Those are all going to depend on how quickly you can fill out your pipeline.
Thank you. And I guess the next question is for ADM and Danone. So Ted and Wendy, how do large companies like yours give small companies, startups a platform where they can be treated as equal partners?
Maybe I start. This is something that I hear quite often, actually. I think it's maybe one of the number one fears of, let's just say, startup companies that are working with us or wanting to work with us. One of the things I think is important, again, going back to scope, one of the things I like to do is to map out what does each party bring to the table. And when you see what they're bringing or what you are bringing, what we are bringing, you see that it's actually very equitable. And we need to be able to have that understanding and that, like who's bringing what to the table. And then you can really see we are really, it doesn't matter how big the company is, when it comes to this mission, when it comes to this project, we're both contributing usually at a pretty equitable rate. And I think that makes people feel better. And of course, we have the agreements, we have our, let's say, MOU or whatever we're operating against, and we have specific milestones and timelines, and we really operate as a project team. And there's a lot of, let's say, good team spirit also that comes with that kind of working relationship. So we're no longer seen as the big company. We are a small project team on this mission together.
Yeah, I would say ADM has done a great job. If you look at just in the precision fermentation space with Perfect Day and new culture, they're really supporting these technologies and scaling, right? And what we need as a CPG is we need a certain level of scale and quality and safety that a big ingredient supplier like ADM has so much deep knowledge in, has such deep resources in, that a startup doesn't need to go out and invest in all of that stuff. And so they can really kind of leverage ADM's capabilities in the best way. And ADM can leverage the startup's technology in the best way so that a CPG like Danone can start to say, this is a direction that we need to start working on. This is something that is real now. We believe in precision fermentation, and now we see that it can be scaled and can start to be cost competitive. And we can start to design it into our products. So I see those partnerships are critical. We've been working with Superbrewed. I saw Julie Post Smith is here in several different categories, and we're a strong believer that Superbrewed can unlock a lot of potential nutrition solutions for us, can unlock some functionality in the right applications, so that's where the partnership, we're going to let them focus on the ingredient, the technology there. They're so responsive to our concerns about one thing or another in their product, and it gives us confidence that if they're that responsive, that they really know their product, they know their technology, they know how to shift it from one place to another to get it where we want it to be, and so we can be successful with it.
That's a great example of a great partnership. And next question, any suggestions regarding how to keep a large potential partner, customer, supplier warm as you await new tech, ingredients, capacity to align with their needs? I'll let anyone hop in on this one.
I think it's, like any relationship, communications and setting the expectations. Sometimes there's the timelines don't exactly align, as I think our participants' questions may, and it also the other flip side of that is, okay, what's the value to the large company? Is it and they have to be transparent. Okay, we can wait, we can't wait, or this is very interesting, and align how that could fit in at the appropriate time. Just because it's a large company, I don't think there should be any unusual concern about being open and honest with that discussion. And a lot of times, some of the larger companies, they have larger timelines anyways, and are looking for investment or looking for technology, and realize it's not, the alternative is to develop it in-house, which may take, several quarters anyway. So I don't think you should be put off as well by any concern. Have that discussion and see where it takes you.
Maybe I can just add on to that, because I think it's also, once we have those initial connections and we know where we are with each other, and I think being transparent, as you're talking about, also just to be realistic about the expectations. And then what often happens is that we have like regular, catch-ups. What's changed? Where are you now, and how can we help? Just to, have these, continued dialogue. I mean, we continue to have, connection to people. So.
And just one more comment there is I would say that, again, over the past period of time, the evolution in how large corporates think about partnering has evolved, and it's enabled us to transition away from simply being a transactional relationship. It's like, what do you have? Let me test it in the black box and I'll tell you whether I want it or not. To more of this partnership, openness, willingness to work with companies, giving the time and effort, as long as it's, again, as long as it's a strategic fit, most of the large companies are, of course, willing to wait because the strategy isn't going to change. They still need it unless there's some other technology that comes along that usurps you or something. But other than that, there's a willingness to continue, and large organizations are being set up to do that. And we're constantly helping our large corporate members at Mista think differently about these things too, and help them understand that the way of behaving and acting now, it needs to be very different than it was a few years ago. But we're seeing that change, and we're seeing that transition and that evolution. So it's exciting.
Thanks, Scott. And I see a question here in the chat. What is the most efficient way to identify the needs that large companies have? And this is a question from Gabriel. And Gabriel, we talked about this a little bit earlier in the panel, and some things that were mentioned. We're looking at the larger companies' annual reports to determine their strategic priorities, really doing a lot of networking, connecting with networking communities, attending conferences and events. And I saw another answer around finding an accelerator or ecosystem partner. So I think those are all really good tools to use when exploring the needs of large companies. We have another question I think is a good one.
Can I add to that really quick?
Yes, please, Ted.
I would say, we're all eaters, right? And if there's a product that you feel could be better, show us how. We recognize the fact that we're on a journey to make the very best. And we constantly are looking for ways to improve our products. We have the absolute best plant-based beverages, but then we come up with this idea of consumers aren't changing fast enough from dairy milk to plant-based milks. What if we made a plant-based milk that was exactly like dairy milk? So we call it dairy-like, and really produce a product that is indiscernible. Our goal is to make it nutritionally identical, to make it taste, to make its mouthfeel, to make its experience identical to dairy milk. So why couldn't you just go directly to a plant-based solution and cut the cow out of it? And so, if you believe that you can close the gap on something that you're buying in the market and you feel like it's just not delivering the consumer experience that you want, and you believe that your product can close that gap, come show us. That's really going to be where we're going to start.
I love that. And that really gets back to that customer first mindset, and just, the criticality of taste in all of these products. This is all food that we're talking about. So another question here: how does a startup think about whether they should do it alone versus looking for a corporate partner? How would you encourage them to evaluate those trade-offs?
I'm just going to
go ahead, Wendy.
I'll just quickly, and then Scott, you can go, because I think one thing, there's a principle. We're really in a different time, like Ted was talking about. This is a whole new world that we're in right now. And we recognize that most of the time, we're better off partnering or doing it, co-creating, doing something, because we believe that it's going to help accelerate that technology. Of course, there are going to be trade-offs when it comes to IP, but you have to look at, let's say, uniqueness and being able to protect that in a good way versus speed, maybe I should say, in the partnership way of working. I think just the simple principle is we're better off doing it together to really accelerate it. But of course, there will be some, depending on the situation, some trade-offs.
And
go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, just to add to that, Wendy, is and it's very different answer if you're an ingredient or technology early stage company versus CPG. But if I'm going to stick to the ingredient and technology side, going it alone in this world is extremely hard, because first of all, scaling the technology is one thing, but then getting it into the market. So how are you going to have a sales organization that's calling on a Kraft Heinz or a Danone or these companies, and getting them to use your product, leverage your product? So it is hard. And so first of all, it's going to require a humongous capital raise. It's going to require a lot of time. And, it would, and I mean, I'm sure there's circumstances out there, but for most circumstances, partnering is going to be probably the biggest value for your company, for your investors, and for the consumers, because you want to get it in consumers' hands faster than anyone else to evolve this food system. So that would be my point.
Yeah, I would say the benefit for me is about time, right? You're buying time when you partner with a ingredient partner or a CPG partner, because you can grow faster. You can leverage that investment into the market more quickly. The return, obviously, you need to share them. So you need to make a decision as a founder of whether you want to be, or your investment advisors are going to be telling you like, no, we want all the money back here. So we want you to go direct to consumer. Well, it requires a lot more work. It requires much more investment up front. It's going to require like building brands and building sales organizations, as Scott already talked about. But, NotCo has demonstrated that this is possible within the past 3 years, coming from South America to North America, and really kind of leveraging the success that they were having there and reinvesting the profits that they were generating in South America. They've made a great entrance into North America. We wish them all the best of luck.
I think
And
go ahead, sir.
I just have one small point on that. I think the other element is investors. Your investors often appreciate that you're partnering in a way so that it actually bolsters your investor profile. So just one note on that.
I mean, I just don't see, I mean, I don't want to sound, like the question was difficult, but I just don't see a path in today's world where you can do it alone. It's just very, very difficult. As I mentioned in my opening comments, a company our size, and we have probably more capabilities than we've ever had, is also spending more time, money, and resources on partnering and collaborating for the very reasons, right, that a startup company should. You can't afford to do it. I don't care how big you are, you cannot afford to do everything alone, particularly at the speed at which needs to be done, as I mentioned. And time, it really comes down to time is money. There's a lot of things you can spend money on, but time really can chew up a lot of money. And that's why I think partnering is with very few exceptions, the way to go.
Great, thank you. Achu, did you have anything to add to that before we move on to the next question?
I would just echo everything the remaining panelists said. Coming from inside of it, it's exactly what we're doing. Time is money, and each of the partners brings something different, right? I know Ted was mentioning about NotCo and NotCo's growth, and then you flip it and you think about the joint venture very, very tangibly. Kraft Heinz has brands that everyone sees, right? When we're talking about speed to scale, it's in most American households. NotCo has a technology and a brand that now can, through the joint venture, partner with those, as you've seen in some of the cheese slices and things like that you see in market, that allow it to penetrate much faster and quicker. The flip side, you have an opportunity to partner on a technology front that allows you to get to that speed much faster by doing this partnership. So I couldn't emphasize more or agree more that when we think about the future, it is all about partnerships. It's all about relationships. It's about bringing those two together to drive the speed that the consumer is looking for nowadays.
Thank you. Our next question here is around kind of the international scope of alt proteins. So how should startups explore the plant-based ecosystem to its fullest potential? How can startups meet all of the partnership criteria when companies have different regulatory guidelines, markets, and customer preferences across geographies? We have quite a few international companies on this call. How do you think about that international element to our food system and to the work that the companies are doing?
I guess as the big international CPG, I'll start. One of the things that we've done is we've made a strategic decision that most of the introductions seem to fit best in North America. The the FDA and GRAS regulatory requirements are much easier and faster, or maybe not easier, but faster than trying to do a novel food clearance in Europe. So we also think that this could allow us to test and learn in North America with North American consumers, understand the technologies, understand the benefits, and delivering on whether it's claims or experience, and then in the parallel, developing those other international regulatory clearances.
I'll just echo exactly as a global ingredient player. That's exactly what I would say.
Yeah, we see we see a number of early stage companies, even if they start in Israel or they start in Europe, many of them are setting up companies in the US to address exactly what Ted said, is that it's easier to get their products approved, over the line, demonstrated, begin to build that return. And so, but the beauty is that once you establish a partnership with these global entities, then, they can help you expand into these other parts of the world. And so that's also yet another advantage of partnering, because it is tough. I mean, even it is very tough.
Yeah, and then, you can leverage that American clearance into other countries like Singapore, South Asia, Israel. So it's really a great place to start.
Thanks for that. And just a note to everyone who's tuned in, our May Business of All Protein seminar will actually be having some folks from the FDA come and present on their pre-market process for GRAS and food additives. So tune in for that if you want to hear directly from the FDA about how to effectively work with them on that approval process. So the next two questions are a bit more specific and granular. The first one, should startups send 2 samples for each prototype for the buyers to evaluate? And then the second one is, can you give a theoretical example of an instance in which an MTA would negatively affect an organization's FTO? So maybe on this 2 sample of each prototype for the buyers to evaluate, Achut, do you have any thoughts on that? Are 2 samples better than 1? How many samples are needed?
I think when it comes down to the samples, I'll go back to what I think a large number of the panelists have said, which is it depends. It depends on what we're showcasing and looking at. There's certain times where if it's 2 different variations, not everything solves every exact attribute you're looking for the consumer. You may have a better or worse. The other alternative is if these samples are across different categories, then you might, we had a question earlier about, is it better to have a full pipeline or present one category? That's what I have to come back to. It depends on what we're trying to address. And what I would say is the sample, more important than the number of samples, is does the sample or samples you're sending address the specific concern or provide the specific attribute or value add that you're looking to deliver? It's not, you don't necessarily gain by providing 15 samples of the same thing across its various iterative phases, right? So it's usually 1, 2, whatever the most likely that is to address that need.
Yeah, I would say the only caveat to that is if you're continuing to make improvements on something, we've received samples and then made some tests with it and decided to move forward, and then gotten another sample and it's different. It's they're making improvements, but maybe it's not exactly what we made a decision on. So that's something just to keep in the back of your mind when you stop iterating and you start sending things out. Obviously, you want to get some early buy-in, but the other side of it is, make sure that the evaluation that the partner is doing is going to be valid once you get to your final product.
That's a really good point, Ted, particularly with startups who are constantly iterating on their processes. And Scott, maybe you can talk a bit about this next one. Can you give a theoretical example of an instance in which an MTA would negatively affect an organization's FTO?
Yeah, that's freedom to operate. So yeah, a specific example here would be that if a internal research arm of the organization is working in the exact same space, so perhaps they're working on the same kind of technology, the same ingredients, and if there are restrictions in that MTA that would prohibit then that internal technology from being used or patented or whatever, that's where it could create a big challenge in freedom to operate. So there needs to be an evaluation, perhaps and that's sometimes where a company will say, no, I'm not going to sign it. I don't want to see it. And then in that case, and sometimes that's okay, because once the product is commercial, and it's in so it's actually been sold and bought by somebody else, then it changes everything. It's no longer experimental. Then you can send samples without an MTA. MTAs are usually only when the products are experimental and they're not in commerce yet. But once it's in commerce, then you're set and you can prove that you sold the material and now you have something to stand on. So if that's the case and somebody says, no, I'm not going to sign it, maybe not going to tell you why, but chances are there's something behind there that is potentially creating a problem, and you may just have to wait or go with another partner, which is fine. Okay, well, I'm going to go find a different ingredient company or different CPG company to go play with, and then maybe once it's commercial, the other company will come back and use it anyway.
Thanks, Scott.
The sticking point that we always get hung up on is there's typically a reverse engineering clause. And to prevent reverse engineering, the startup will ask you never to send it out to a third party for evaluation or anything that might reveal something about their product. And sometimes that doesn't work for us. Like if we're working on infant formula, we need to know exactly what's in an oil or a protein. And so what we'll often do in our MTA is we'll put in a clause that's about, well, if we're going to send it out to a third party, we'll send it out blinded, right? We'll completely remove all of the identification. We'll put it under a number. We also have a non-disclosure agreement with the labs that we send stuff out to. But, it gives us and our developers and scientists the confidence that we're heading down a road with a product that we know everything about.
Thank you. So we have just about 2 minutes, under 2 minutes remaining before we close out today. I'm seeing a question here about giving a few non-trivial examples for partnerships that make sense, that create a win-win situation. And I think we've already spoken about a few of them. Obviously, the partnership with Kraft Heinz and the Knot Company. We talked about Superbrood's partnership with Danone. ADM, you have your partnership with New Culture. Are there any other partnerships that you would like to elevate at this time that you think are a great example of that win-win situation?
So, we ran a challenge at the Future Food Tech last year for improving plant-based cheese, and Alfred's won that challenge. We're continuing to do evaluations, and we have a strong belief that Alfred's got a great technology. So it's one of those things where you don't have to have an ingredient. Maybe you've got a new process or you've got a new methodology. Just as another example of how you can make a difference in changing the food system.
Yeah, many times these partnerships are actually confidential, and so there's plenty of them, but they actually can't be shared because they're under confidentiality or non-disclosure agreements. Yeah, so there's sometimes it's hard to share some of the details to that, but obviously there's plenty of public examples that everyone mentioned here today.
Indeed, and I think a big takeaway from today was just how important partnerships are in moving the sector forward. You can't do it alone, so these create a win-win for both sides of the equation, on the corporate and the startup side. With that, we'll end today's seminar. Thank you so much to all of our panelists for sharing your wonderful insights on this topic. And thank you everyone for tuning in. Just a reminder, we'll be sending a copy of the recording to you via email, and you can check out a recording of this on our YouTube channel, along with all of our previous seminars. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Audrey.